from last time, I just want to share the link from the video that we watched last time with you guys. So here you go. It's in the chat so you can see it. And then I'm going to continue from where we left off. Once it decides to, there we go. Okay. So we were discussing plants specifically and how plants grow and how they work. So here is a cross section of a leaf, and at the top we've got the epidermis, which is a bunch of little flat scale-like cells, and it sometimes has little things called trichomes, which is little hairs on the plant. And then it's also got these are palisade cells over there, which help to conduct the palisade cells don't conduct, they help to photosynthesize. And then we've got the actual conductive tissues, which is those little bunches of tissues over there. And we get two kinds of conductive tissues. We've got the xylem, which carries the water, and the phloem, which carries the sugary, starchy syrup back down through the plant. So last time we stopped over here. So this is what a stem looks like. And a stem has these little bits over here, which is the xylem and the phloem. And then we were talking about secondary growth. So secondary growth is when, so primary growth, you've got the xylem and the phloem in these little roundish shaped tubes thingies going up. But when secondary growth starts, what happens is you would have the xylem and the phloem form these rings. And then the cells on the inside of these rings would start dying, and they would then slowly be compressed. And that is the woody tissue that you get inside plants. So as this dies, then you've got the rings over here of the xylem and phloem. So these are living. The things on the inside is then pretty much dead. And but these things on the inside are there. Their cell walls are still there. Specifically the ones made of lignin that will then give structure and strength to the plant. Where these would then take over the sort of canneling of fluids around the plant. So if you look at a tree, then you can see right in the center over there is its first year's growth. That would be the actual primary growth part. And then each time some secondary growth would happen. So, and then it would form some rings, and then some more, some secondary growth would happen again the next year, forming more rings. The cells on the inside of those would actually then die and would become sapwood. And as it starts compressing all of this down by the rings, you would start getting heartwood in the center and then sapwood on the outside. And then just before the bark is the actual part of the tree that is conducting the water upwards. So this is why if you've got a tree and you cut a ring right around the bark of the tree, then the tree actually dies because all of that conductive tissue is gone. So the water can't go from the roots to the leaves anymore. So don't do that to trees. Yes, so now I'm going to show you guys what a root looks like. So here we've got a root over here. So firstly, on the outside of the root, we've got the epidermis over here, and it makes little root hairs, which is literally the outside part of the cell stretching out to make a little root hair, also as well as a part of its vacuole, so that water can diffuse through the cell wall into the vacuole easily. And that is the very, very, very fine roots that you can get in plants. So then the water would be sucked up through here, and it could then diffuse through all of these tissues into the center. So right in the center, you've got the xylem, which will take the water upwards. And then right beside the xylem, you've got the phloem, which brings the sugary syrup made from the leaves downwards again. This over here is pretty much just ground cells or parenchyma cells. You don't need to know the words. But these are then used to store the nutrients from the phloem in the root, so that if it becomes winter and things, then the plant still has all of its stored nutrients, and it can use those again when spring comes to grow and to make new leaves. So here we get to parenchyma tissue. This is what it looks like. It's got very, very large vacuoles on the inside, and these are pretty much the tissues. They make the majority of the cells that you see in plants. This is the kind of tissues that you find in fruit and all sorts of other things, and these are primarily used for storing nutrients. Let me just, here we go. So these are primarily used for storing nutrients. So they've got large vacuoles in order to do so. Yes. So then I want to go down. So parenchyma cells are they've got very thick cell walls. And these are the ones that form up the support structure of the plants. And then you get sclerenchyma. These are specifically made to support the plant. So the previous ones are there to form the support structures. These are what you get in very, very woody plants. So they've got very, very thick cell walls over here. And then the cells on the inside would die. The cells are literally just there to make these thick cell walls, which will then eventually turn into essentially wood. This is why trees can grow so large. They make these thick cell walls which form lots of woody fibers, and then it gets compressed together to make it even stronger. And these are made of lignin. Then what did I want to show you? Oh, over here. Yes. So now we get to how plants are adapted for specific functions. So if you get cactuses, then cactuses tend to not have leaves with lots of stomata on them, because leaves with lots of stomata end up having lots of water evaporate off. So most of the cactuses you see don't have lots of stomata on their leaves specifically for that reason. You can also get cactuses that have a very thick waxy layer over the top, which prevents water evaporating through the skin of the leaf. Another way that cactuses prevent water from escaping is by using literal little hairs on the surface of their leaves. So I've got a little cactus over here that I want to show you guys. So here we go. Let's just, oh, there we go. So here's our little cactus. I don't know if you guys can see, but it actually has quite a lot of leaves on it. See if it'll focus. Come on. It's not focusing. Okay. So its leaves are very soft and fluffy. And it's got lots and lots of little hairs on it. And this is specifically to prevent water from evaporating off of it. So that's this little plant. And then I've got another plant that I want to show you guys. Over here. Yeah, now you can pretty much not see me. Here we go. So if you can see, the leaves of this plant is very, very shiny, especially this one over here. And that shininess that you see is actually the waxy layer on the top of the leaf. And if you take your nail and you like scratch just a smidge on the leaf, you could actually get some of that wax trapped underneath your nail, just to show you guys the waxy epidermis layer. So plants, there we go. Okay, So plants are adapted in very, very many ways in order to live in the environment that they live in. Plants in rainforests actually have more stomata than you would think, based off of normal plants, just due to the fact that there is a lot of water there. So they don't have to be shy about letting water go. They can just take as much air in as they need and let as much water go as they need. It's perfectly fine for them. So you get very, very, very many different ways of plants adapting. So let me just go back to over here. So here we've got different kinds of adaptations that plants make. So the position of the stomata can be in different ways. So stomata are normally found on both surfaces of the leaf, but usually you find more on the bottom surface, just due to the fact that the bottom surface of the leaf is normally in shade, and so it doesn't get quite as much sun and have as much water evaporate off of it. Some kinds of plants, especially xerophytes, which is a fancy name for cacti, literally means have their stomata, instead of being on the surface of the leaf, but in little porous holes to prevent more water from escaping. They've also got thickened waxy layers, so the thickened layer over there. They've got hairs on leaves, as this little plant that I showed you guys has. Then you can also have leaves being smaller to prevent lots of water loss. This you get very often on savanna. The trees that grow in savanna, like the acacia trees, they have very, very tiny little leaves that lots of leaves, but tiny little leaves, in order to prevent the loss of water through the leaves. Some you've got very spiny, hard leaves, especially these kinds of ones. I can't remember what that plant's called. I'll have to look it up. I'm sorry. But the spiny leaves and the hardened leaves actually also help to prevent water loss. So then you get leaf arrangement. Some plants literally keep their leaves, instead of having them lie flat like this to get lots of sun, keep them sort of upright, so that less water, they get less sun on their surface in order to have less water evaporate. So this you get very, very often in cacti, because you just get this one big sort of upright part of the cactus, and then that is to prevent as much sun getting on it, because in the desert there is way too much sun and not enough water. So they try to minimize the sun and maximize the water. So then you can also get different kinds of plants that can roll up their leaves or things like that. I can't think of a good example of this, but in ferns especially, as the young fern is busy growing, the leaves will actually grow on the inside, and then it'll unroll it as the leaves mature, in order to prevent lots of water loss from the immature leaves. Also to protect the immature leaves from animals and things like that. So we get lots and lots of different ways that plants are adapted. So yes, I also wanted to show you guys over here. Yep, back to this plant. If you look at a single leaf, like this one over here, then you can see on top there is a very big line in the center, and then smaller lines coming off of it. And if you look at the bottom of the leaf, you can actually see that big line, which is lots and lots of conductive tissue. It also gives some strength to the leaf. And then the smaller lines coming off is also lots of conductive tissue, stretching out over the length of the leaf in order to get water to where it's supposed to go, so that the plant can photosynthesize. And then if you look even closer, then you can see little radial lines coming from the smaller lines coming off of it, in order to reach all of the parts of the leaf. So I'm going to draw that for you guys quickly. Let me just get to over here. So here we go. So you would have your leaf, which would look like this. It would have a big center line going down. Then it would have smaller lines going across the leaf, like so, to reach the outside edges. And then in between these, you would get lots of little radial parts coming off, and they can branch off in all sorts of different directions, actually making lots of little patterns all over the leaf. And this is those over here. This is those little conductive layers over here that are actually just a few cells thick, is those tiny little in-between bits. And the conductive layers that are lots of cells thick, let me just get to those so you can see them again. So that are more than just 2 or 3 cells thick would be where you would get the bigger sort of arteries in the leaf. So where were those? Like this. So here you've got some xylem over here, which is little big cells transporting water. And these, they're not just like 2 or 3 cells thick, these are many cells thick, as is the phloem. They're many cells thick. So that is the artery bits that you get inside the leaves. So, okay, we've got some questions. If you've got some more questions, you're welcome to ask now. So here is a question that says, starch is a store of energy. It's a carbohydrate and forms colorless grains in the cytoplasm of leaf cells in the palisade and spongy mesophyll layers. Okay, yes. So we go back to over here so I can show you guys. Okay, so over here, if you've got lots of where the carbohydrates are formed is mostly in the palisade cells. They have the greatest amount of chloroplasts, which is the little green parts of the cell. Let me show you a plant cell again. So, just trying to find one quick plant cell. Okay, here we go. There, here he's got the Google search. So let me just find a good picture. This is not a bad picture, so let's take that one. So a plant cell's basic functions, you've got the nucleus and the ribosomes, which help to make all of the different proteins that the cell is made of. And then you've got the chloroplast, which is these little green sort of round things that these actually help. They're filled with chlorophyll, and these are the ones that actually make the starchiness. So the cells over here, wait, this is taking a while. Okay, so the palisade cells have lots of these little chloroplasts, and they are the ones that make most of the sugary, syrupy goodness. It doesn't mean that the other cells don't have chloroplasts. They do. They've just got less chloroplasts than the palisade cells. The palisade cells are the main workers of the leaf factory, and these are just, they sort of help, but they're not quite the main workers. So if you have a plant that stores its energy in its leaves, like the cactuses do with their thick leaves, then you would get most of the actual starch and things being stored in these ground cell layers. You do get plants that have palisade cells on both sides of their leaves and then the ground cells in between. But in cactuses, you would get the storage of things in these layers over here, and in the palisade, that is mostly where the starch is made. So most plants will store their starchy, syrupy goodness that they made in different parts of the plant. So some of them would actually store it in the stem, which means that the stem is slightly thicker and you would get most of the storage actually happening in the ground cell layers of the stem. So let me see if I can find a diagram of a stem, sort of like this. Okay, so here we've got a stem of a herbaceous kind of plant. This means plants that don't undergo secondary growth. They don't start making ring structures of xylem and phloem. They just keep to these little bunches of them, sort of like celery. There, most of the actual storage takes place in this sort of in-between part over here. So great examples of this is like celery or other different kinds of stalkish plants. Asparagus is a good example, as well as what do you call those? Spring onions. It's not spring onions, it's chives. Also quite store a lot of their energy in the stem and leaf part of the plant. Then you get other kinds of plants where it would actually transport all of the phloem down and go store it in their roots, in which case we get this sort of situation. So it would have the xylem and phloem, and then most of the roots would actually be comprised of these ground cells storing all of the starchy, sugary goodness. This is things like carrots have. If you look at a carrot, like next time you guys make food, take a carrot, cut it open so you've got like a little ring of carrot. Then you can very easily see all of the layers around the edge where this layer is over here where all of the starchy goodness is stored. And then in the middle, you can actually see the conductive tissues and things. And it's very, very easy to see in a carrot because that's literally what carrots do. They store all of their goodness in their main root. So do we have another question? I don't see more questions at the moment. So lots of these terms you don't need to know. Any specific terms that you do need to know will be covered in your textbook or your lessons. I try to go through these things in slightly more detail than your textbook and your lessons actually call for. And that is mainly just because, for me at least, if I have more of a background of how something works, actually being able to explain it in a test and doing the work based on it becomes a lot easier. So yes, okay, we've got another question. It says, a plant with white patches on its leaves is needed to investigate the role of chlorophyll in starch production. Okay, so here it's literally based on the amount of chloroplast that you have in the plant. So again, this plant is an excellent example because it's our little office plant over here. And while most of its leaves are a nice, lovely green color, some of its leaves are slightly yellowish. And if you look at it even closer, you can actually see, there you go, you can actually see little yellowish spots and bits that come around. So here's another nice yellowy leaf over here. Main reason for this is for over the December holidays, this plant didn't get quite as much water as it would have gotten normally. It also didn't get quite as much sunlight as it would have gotten normally. And so some of its leaves are slightly yellowed. So what you would need is you would need a plant very similar to this that have some good, very green leaves and some slightly yellowish leaves. I'm putting them next to each other so you can see that sort of difference over there. And then you can take a part of each of these leaves in order to test using tests that are written in your lesson online. So I don't know if you can get all of the chemicals from there, but yes.